There are a number of times in my life that I have cried, for different reasons as well. I think some of the times when I think about the ways in which I've cried or that was a response to something, most of them probably had to do with being sad. And in more particular cases, had to do with loved ones or friends who have gone on before me. One stands out to me in particular. The first time I was really, truly confronted with the sting of death was on April 27, 1977. It was a beautiful spring day, I'll never forget. I played softball for our church's, or for our school's team, and was out by second base playing. And after the game, came home, and I learned that my grandfather, my mom's dad, had died very unexpectedly. He suffered a massive stroke. Thankfully, we were told he didn't suffer, and there was nothing that anybody could have done for him. But he was just 66 years old. I was just 13 years old, and I didn't know what to make of all this. We gathered as a family, and I remember seeing my grandpa laying there in the casket, and I thought, I will never see this person again, be able to spend time with him, which made me sad, and my response was to cry. I remember looking at the faces of my family, of my parents in particular, my mother, and how sad they were, and my aunts and uncles, and it made me cry. There's one in our passage that we'll hear of this morning, a good friend of Jesus, who died. And people's natural response was to cry. Now, I know that's not always the case and it's not expected, but it is quite a common response when someone we love dies, to cry. I want you to hear the way in which this is explained in the Gospel according to John. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world, but those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them. After saying this, he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right. Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and she met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her were also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he had been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked up and upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to him, "Unbind him and let him go." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Jesus came into a familiar situation here, really, if we understand this context. It was very common in the Jewish culture for the entire community to gather when someone died. In fact, it was expected that you would go and you would pay your respects. So having this large crowd there wasn't uncommon. And typically when somebody died because of the climate, they would bury the body as quickly as possible. Now, they would put the body in a cave, just like we heard that was described in this passage, and cover it with a stone. There would be 2 stages of mourning that would occur. Usually in the first week, it was a very deep kind of mourning. And in fact, people would spend 3 days crying. And it wasn't just like dab your eyes with a tissue kind of thing. It'd be deep wailing and sobbing and just pouring your heart out, kind of crying for a good 3 days. And then the mourning would continue on actually for a month. There were things that wouldn't be allowed to do while the body was in the house, but once they actually took the body and placed the body in the cave or the tomb and would cover it with this stone, after that occurred, the entire community would come and they'd gather at someone's home, and they would share a meal together, and this meal was usually put together by community members, family, and friends. You know what, though? It wasn't turkey and ham on buns. They typically had bread, eggs, and lentils. And the eggs and lentils, because of their they actually symbolize life, but then because of the shape, there was this sense that in which, rolling, it was this rolling toward death kind of thing. So all these people are gathered here. So this isn't unusual what's going on. I think what is a little unusual is the response we see of the 2 sisters here. Jesus is making his way coming. Martha hears he's coming. Jesus actually hadn't quite arrived there yet to the exact location where Mary and Martha and all these other people were. So Mary comes and greets him. Now, I don't know if you caught this. She really didn't greet him. Now, I find that a bit unusual. She doesn't say, "Oh, Lord, I'm so glad to see you. I'm so glad you made it here. I'm so glad you're with us." Now, typically, I see that happen when people are gathering for a memorial or a visitation or something of that nature. They're so thankful people came to spend time with them. She doesn't do that here. Did you catch what she said? It almost sounds kind of abrasive or harsh. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Now, she goes on and it kind of softens it a little bit, but I know this, that you have the power to do this, that whatever you ask of God. And they continue their conversation, and they're talking about the resurrection. Well, she knows, yes, the resurrection. He'll be raised at the resurrection. Jesus is using kind of a twofold thing here. No, you don't get it. Yes, he's going to be raised at the resurrection, but guess what? I am the resurrection. This conversation ends. It's brief. Martha goes back, but Jesus stays put where he is. Now, this whole time, Mary's still back with all the guests at the house. Martha comes back and says, the teacher wants to see you. She scoots off. Jesus is still there. She scoots off to where Jesus is. She kneels on her feet. Did you catch what she said? Not a typical greeting. Lord, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you came to be with us. I wish you could have seen Lazarus, or Lazarus could have seen you, something like that. And there's nothing like that. Her response almost seems harsh and abrasive. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. The exact same words Martha spoke. If you had been here, if only. And I wonder how many times we speak those words, if only. If only. If only he wouldn't have stepped out in front of that car. If only she wouldn't have taken all those pills. If only would have stayed home on vacation and wouldn't have gone to that place. If only he would have passed that test. If only somebody else would have been elected to office. If only. I think we all have our if only, and have a desire to perhaps turn back the clock. That's kind of ironic since we had to turn it forward today, last night. But I think we all have moments in our life where we want to turn back the clock, literally. I don't like this whole time change thing. Anyway, I have wondered how many times my grandmother spoke those words before she passed away on June 3, 1983, at the age of 71. For you see, my grandmother never learned how to drive. She never got a driver's license. And she was forever reliant on other people for rides to places. She had a part-time job, and I'm sure it was to kind of probably occupy some of her time, since children and grandchildren were all older now at this point, and maybe even to supplement their Social Security income. But she had a very part-time job cleaning a few houses each day of the week. And she and my grandfather had that schedule pretty well in wrap, where he would bring her faithfully to these jobs to go clean. And he knew what time she would be done and would be waiting there to pick her up. Well, on April 27, 1977, he drove her to this job to go clean this house. And the appointed time came and went that he was supposed to be there to pick her up. She waited for a bit, wondering where he was. My grandpa was never late. She tried calling, no answer. I'm not sure how long she waited. I'm not sure how many times she tried calling. But finally it got to the point where people were kind of realizing something's not right here. And one of the homeowners drove my grandmother to their home. Everything wasn't all right. It was never going to be the same. And despite being told by the doctors, he didn't suffer, there's nothing you could have done or anybody else could have done, I can't help but wonder how many times she still said, if only. If only I would have been home. If only I didn't go clean that day. If only, Lord, you would have prompted me to stay home. If only. And you know what amazes me? Is Jesus' response. His response to Mary, to Martha, and I'm sure to my grandmother. He did not rebuke either one of them. No. There were two things that he did, and I thought, with such grace and mercy, and we have a lot to learn from. He showed them exactly who he was. And it's a twofold image here that John weaves together, showing us that Jesus is the Messiah who's fully God and yet is fully human. Jesus points them, Martha specifically, to the resurrection. And yes, she didn't completely understand it at first because he was standing, yes, telling her, he will rise one day. Yes, that's going to happen, but you don't get it. I am the resurrection and the life, and this is going to happen like now, right before your eyes. And then we see this other side of Jesus where he's with them. And when he asks, where have they laid him? And the crowd responds, come and see, and he goes. Jesus cries, he weeps. No doubt, standing there weeping like a baby, sobbing. This is his good friend. No doubt, weeping and sobbing, seeing his dear friends, Mary and Martha, crying, and those other people gathered there who were sad and grieving, being deeply moved in spirit. And I believe with all my heart, on April 27, 1977, that Jesus wept when his good friend Harold Aldrink died. That he wept seeing my grandmother Jeanette in tears grieving her husband. That Jesus wept when he saw my parents and my aunts and uncles and my cousins and myself in tears crying. Because Jesus feels the things that we feel. He understands the pain that we're experiencing. But we have to hold those things in tension with one another. And that's what Jesus is doing here, pointing them to the future, but also reminding them that I am here with you. You are not alone. And we can't pull those apart, but I think sometimes, and I caught just a few pieces, I still need to watch last week's message, but I heard the part where Wayne was talking about being with people and sometimes how it's best just to be there in silence to let people know that you're there. And that's true. Perhaps you've heard of this gentleman in the Old Testament. His name is Job. He suffered loss like you wouldn't believe. His house, his possessions, that's bad enough. But then all 10 children. How horrible is that? And his friends come to console him. At least, I think that's what they were trying to do. And they did okay until they opened their mouths. I think they did okay until they opened their mouths. If they just would have been there with Job and not said anything and started questioning anything, going, well, you must have sinned. You did something. Something's not right here. And what I remember in that funeral home during the visitation is people who came and didn't necessarily say anything. Maybe I'm sorry. put their arm around you, gave you a hug, but they were there. But then there was also this reminder of hope, knowing that my grandfather would be resurrected by the one who said, I am the resurrection and the life. And I think sometimes maybe we underestimate how much God really does care for us and cry or weeps when we weep. I think the psalmist does a remarkable job of reminding us of the depth that the Lord cares. This is what the psalmist writes in Psalm 56, verse 8. You have kept count of my tossings. Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your record? Isn't that amazing? Every tear that's ever dripped and rolled down our cheeks and dripped off, the Lord knows. And not only that, they're in a bottle. He cares for us. But as I mentioned, this is a twofold promise here in the Gospel of John, of the way in which we experience God with us in the flesh, but also of something that's coming in the future. That yes, there is going to be a day, praise God, when there is not going to be any more death, no mourning, no crying, no pain. John wrote about that as well in the book of Revelation. This is what he writes there. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, see, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them as their God. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more. For the first things have passed away. And the one who was seated on the throne said, see, I am making all things new. Also he said, write this, for these words are trustworthy and true. This is what Jesus desires for all of humanity, all of humankind, that we experience that promise of what's in the future, of that day when there will be no more death, no more pain, no more crying, no more mourning. Oh, how it must break his heart when people say, I don't want that. And I know Wayne mentioned this, that there was another time in the Bible we learn of that Jesus wept in the Gospel according to Luke. And I wonder if part of that was on his mind as he entered Jerusalem, when he wept over the city. This is what we learn of there, according to the Gospel of Luke. As he came near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, if you, even you, had only recognized on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. Indeed, the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up ramparts around you and surround you and hem you in on every side. They will crush you to the ground and your children within you, and they will not leave within you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation from God. Do you know what day of the week this occurred? This was all part of Passover. This occurred on the day that the people would select or choose the lambs that were to be sacrificed. John, when he first sees Jesus coming toward him in his gospel, says, see, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Jesus riding in the donkey that day to Jerusalem, weeping over the city, probably shedding tears, knowing that there will be people who will not select the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. He said, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? You know, death isn't the only reason that we cry. I've cried when I've been honest with people. I've cried when people have been honest with me. I've cried when I have lied to people, and I have cried when people have lied to me. I've cried when I've tried to stand by and be loyal in situations. I've cried when I've been betrayed, or when I have betrayed. I've cried when I've been brave and tried to stand my ground, but I have also cried when I've been scared or run away. And yet I know that Jesus is with me. And the one who wept has the power over death and sin, and says, come.